Our guest today on Current Conversations is a leading biologist and a leader nationally in science education. Dr. Joseph Travis teaches at Florida State University, where he was chair of the Department of Biology. Dr. Travis has also been director for the program in computational biology, and from 2000 to 2005, he was director of the Computational Science and Information Technology School. Until recently, he was dean of Florida State's College of Arts and Sciences. Dr. Joseph Travis is a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and he has served as president of the American Society of Naturalists. In 2011, he won the prestigious E.O. Wilson Naturalist Award from the American Society of Naturalists, and, along with colleague Michael Ruse, he is co-editor of the recent book called Evolution: The First 4 Billion Years from Harvard University Press. Currently, OU's College of Arts and Sciences and Department of Zoology are hosting Dr. Travis on the OU campus. Today's discussion will be about the status of teaching science in the U.S. Dr. Travis, it is wonderful to have you here on Current Conversations. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Could you start off just by talking to us about the status of science education in the U.S.?
Science education is at an interesting crossroads. We have on the one hand a great deal of pressure to educate more of our citizens in science, more of our citizens in technology, more of our citizens in math. On the other hand, we have some of the most puzzling anti-science attitudes in society that I think we've ever had. And so there's this funny dichotomy acting, and how we resolve that was actually going to have a great deal of importance for the future, for our own future, because we really are never going to encourage young men and women to go into science if we have an anti-science attitude. On the other hand, where are the innovations going to come from? Where are our doctors going to come from? Where are our dentists and so on going to come from, if not from our young men and women interested in science?
Now, I'm getting the impression, as I read around just a little bit in this area, that the report card grade hasn't been very good over the last couple of years. Would you talk about that, and what are the benchmarks that we would use to decide if science education is working or not?
There are a lot of ways we could look at whether science education is working. The simplest way is we can look at tests of achievement, in which we compare American students against their counterparts in other countries.
Right.
On many of those tests of achievement, we come up lacking when measured against the size of our economy, the opportunities for education we offer, and the kind of heritage of education that we carry in this country. So we have fallen, if you will, in our achievement levels compared against what we think is possible. So that's one measure.
I saw just the other day a 2010 study from Harvard University that said that only 6% of American students can do advanced math. That's the kind of thing you're talking about.
That's right. That's right. The percentage of our students who can do advanced math, the percentage of our population who understands fundamental scientific concepts, even some of the most fundamental of scientific concepts, is really fallen, and I think it's a real cause for concern. The number of students taking advanced degrees in science or technology, the number of students taking bachelor's degrees. To give you an example, the Department of Education maintains a very nice database on degrees given in United States colleges and universities. The total student population, the total number of degrees given since about the early 1970s has gone up several fold. The number of bachelor's degrees in math given out has remained constant. And if you think about that for a minute, you realize that the proportion of all of our students studying math has dropped like a stone. That, in a nutshell, tells you what's been happening to science and math education.
The study I mentioned before, the Harvard study, actually placed us like 31 in the world, very low. There's an Exxon commercial, I think, right now, talking about how in a recent study, a recent test, we were 17th in the world. When did we get this? We must have gotten this right somewhere in the past. Was there a golden era of science education? Would it be after Sputnik,
I think
after 1957?
there are a lot of folks who believe that era after World War II and intensifying after Sputnik was a golden era of science education, because there was a recognition that we needed to step up our efforts to step up our efforts in science education, step up our efforts in scientific achievement as a society. I think that followed World War II. It followed Sputnik in particular. Probably after Sputnik, it captured the popular imagination more. So, and you can see this in its reflection of television shows about scientists in outer space, television shows about that are really about scientific achievement at one level or other, things that captured the public imagination. So that was probably a golden era for us in science education, an era where the college-age population was booming, the levels of education in terms of high school completion, college graduation at this country were unprecedented. We had never had so many people finishing secondary school. We have never had so many people going to college. We never had so many people interested in science. So I think that was what many people think of as a golden era.
My impression is that the large amounts of money that were available after 1957 either went to the lab bench on the one side for actual working scientists or in the classroom. But the thing that occurs to me is in so many ways we're the heirs of the money that was put into science. I remember I was in a class, the Yale Mathematics Study Group or something. It was the new math, and I remember not understanding very much about it. Is it possible that investment in some ways hasn't paid off educationally, that we are the heirs of that period and science education isn't going that well?
It's certainly not going that well now. Whether that, I think I would argue actually a little bit the opposite, that investment paid enormous dividends. And you can even go backwards to the investment after World War II in the late 1940s in organizations like the National Science Foundation, the National Institutes of Health, which paid not only for science research, but for advances in science education and to support students studying science. I think that those investments paid enormous dividends if you look at our gains in health, our gains in technology, our gains in science. The Defense Department investments of the 50s and 1960s paid enormous dividends in technology. The internet is a product of that. The mouse on your computer is a product of that. We used to joke about Tang, the breakfast drink, being a product of NASA.
Went to the moon. Yeah.
Went to the moon. Many people think Tang is a dubious achievement. Nonetheless, some of the advances in freeze drying, all sorts of things have come out of that kind of investment. What is really striking is that we have not been able to capitalize on that investment in the modern era, the era we're in terms of a well-informed, scientifically literate population and an excitement about science that continues to draw students into it as it did before.
I think you're already answering a question I was going to ask you. I was going to say, well, what went wrong? How did we seem to get it so right after 1957, and then we can't seem to get it right now? But I think you're implying now that cycle just ran its course, right? We invested in science, and now we need a new initiative for the future. Is that what you're saying?
I think that's one argument one could make, that we need some kind of new. We need to capture people's imagination and make science fun. People pursue what they enjoy, and one of the reasons I became a scientist was it seemed like fun. I had a friend who always used to say, we break down the barrier between working and goofing around. We would do this even if they didn't pay us to do it because it's fun. We have lost that. We have lost that a lot. If you now look at a lot of our undergraduates, if you look at our secondary school students, look at our middle school students, they will say, I don't like science. It's too hard. It's too boring. It isn't interesting. And that's where I think we really have missed the boat, if you will. We've somehow managed to convince students that it's hard, it's boring, and they can't do it.
Yeah, since you mentioned it, I think of all those CSI shows, or crime scene investigation, where they're basically forensic scientists, and you're actually in the TV cameras in the lab with them, helping them to solve a problem. Maybe that's stirring the pot a little bit, getting some interest reignited.
It certainly gets some of the students interested. There are a couple of middle schools in the Tallahassee area that have little CSI-like programs for their students that get the students interested in crime scene investigations from those shows. So there's a little bit of that. But I actually think we could do better even without the CSI type shows, because we have fallen into a problem in our middle school science. And I point to middle school because the data suggests that when we lose students to science, we lose them in middle school.
Is that the point where science really starts becoming science? It's not just preparation?
That's the point where they either decide they like it or they don't.
Yeah.
And what we're doing, I think, to turn off a lot of students is we're making science seem like a collection of facts and a collection of things they have to memorize and learn, rather than science as a process of thinking about your world.
Well, I think you're already suggesting where I wanted to go next. When you hear science education criticized, very often people focus on teaching to the test. And I'm not sure that everybody's even clear what that is. What does teaching to the test mean exactly? How does it work in the classroom?
Well, teaching to the test is the slang usually employed to describe what happens when students are made to take standardized tests at the end of every year, and there is some premium on the student test scores that feeds back to the school's funding or the teacher's salaries or the teacher's raises or some measure of the school's suitability. As a result, an inordinate amount of emphasis gets placed on the student's scores. So a lot of time is then spent in the classroom teaching students how to take the kinds of tests that are given. They're often multiple choice tests. They can be graded in different ways. Different places use different methods. A lot of time is spent teaching students how to take the test, and then teaching students to be able to regurgitate the kind of information that these standardized tests ask them. So what is the definition of an electron? What is the definition of a cell? Plant cells have cell walls.
So
Animal cells do not.
Based on how the students do at a particular school, they could lose funding from Race to the Top or
That's correct.
No Child Left Behind or whatever. So the outcome is really important.
The outcome is very important. So, of course, a great deal of emphasis is placed on those test scores. And to the teaching to the test refers to the perception that not enough emphasis then is placed on actually teaching the material to the students, teaching concepts in critical thinking, but teaching how to regurgitate information that they were handed, the kinds of things that will be asked on the test.
So it's just too strict of a path. The students are on to take the test, and everything else that people value about education is just going to be left to the sidelines. Is that the critique
The perception is that there's no time to do the interesting things.
Right.
There's no time to do exploratory learning. There's no time to do the fun things that make learning exciting. They're too busy focusing on the standards that have to be met and what the students have to know.
Isn't it a fact that as teaching to the test has been studied, that really haven't been great results? I mean, it hasn't really brought up achievement at all, has it?
That's one of the interesting observations, that for all the effort at reform, all the effort at standardized testing, all the effort at many different ideas, we're not making much progress.
Yeah. Having a standardized test like that doesn't seem like the worst thing in the world, though. I mean, could there be a good side to it? I've heard that some professors and teachers are actually tweaking the way they prepare students, and they're not cutting away quite so much, that it's a fuller education. Is there another side to it?
There's nothing really wrong with the idea of having standardized testing.
Okay.
There's nothing really wrong with the idea of holding people accountable for the test results. The two issues that I think have to be thought through very clearly from my perspective are, first of all, what are you actually testing them on? What's the subject matter for the test? And secondly, how do you know when a teacher's been effective, when a school has been effective? With respect to the first, if we gave the test with questions that ask students to solve problems, these tests could be very useful measures. And by that I mean, if we ask the students, the electron is defined as A this, B that, C that, D that, those are mere facts, and some of that is important. But if we then gave them a problem that said a certain amount of energy is focused on an atom, what do you expect the electron to do? A, jump energy states, B, et cetera, et cetera. If we worked with asking them to solve problems, we would probably get better gains in the effectiveness of science education. The other issue is, how do you evaluate how effective the teacher has been? Because one of the unpleasant facts that gets ignored in many of these discussions is that the performance of students on these tests is beautifully predicted by this economic stratum in which they live. So, for example, if you come with me to Tallahassee, we could make a table that says of all the elementary schools, what proportion of the students are on the subsidized lunch program. And the higher that proportion, the poorer the neighborhood in which the school is situated. The higher that proportion is, the lower their scores on the test will be.
That's incredible.
And that's true at every scale you measure it. Schools within a district, districts within a state, states within the nation. And it's a very tight relationship. So then you say, well, a teacher is a good teacher, a school is a good school, if they've gotten their students above the line you'd expect them to be on for their economic level.
So basically, I think the drift of what you're saying now, and I think it's maybe Jeffrey Canada's point with the Harlem Kid Zone, is it called, is that students live in a whole environment that's teaching them, not
Correct.
just the school. And it's the whole environment in some way that has to be fixed. That's
right.
a pretty tall order.
It's a very tall order. And in many ways, we have schools designed for a society that no longer exists. So if you think about our school day, the typical school day is 8 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon. That was wonderful when one parent was always home waiting at 3 in the afternoon for the children to come home. When both parents were in the home and dinner was at a set time, and the students then did their homework after dinner, the kind of world in which I grew up. But we have a lot of households in which there is no one home at 3 o'clock, in which both parents are working, a lot of single parent households, a lot of households where the children go home to their grandparents or their grandparents pick them up, a lot of households where the kind of routine, supportive environment that we think about in our ideal world no longer exists. Yet our school day, our school year, our whole system is still based as if that's society.
So even if the
Still
teaching
exists.
is just top shelf in the school, if the life is in shambles, then you're probably not going to get good results.
You're going to struggle to get good results, and it's going to take a different approach to those students.
Now, when people talk about current science education, they also focus on teachers a little bit and teacher preparation. Thoughts there? Is teacher preparation where it should be?
Depends on which state you're in, and depends on which school district you're in. Especially in math and science, teacher preparation in many places was not very strong. In Florida, for example, you could be certified to teach science with very few hours of science courses. We had a system in which teachers were majoring in education, some form of degree, getting some kind of degree in education, and then teaching science without strong backgrounds in that science. And I think that has been a serious problem. Now there are a lot of programs to remedy this. One of the really successful ones came out of the University of Texas called UTeach, and a lot of universities, my own included, have followed their lead. In the UTeach program, a student majors in a discipline, in math or in biology or in physics.
At what age are we talking about now?
Undergraduates.
Okay.
And then those students also get trained in pedagogy. Sometimes they have a double major in a college of education. And when they emerge, they are going to be middle and high school science and math teachers who really understand their subject and ideally will have a passion for that subject. And it's that passion that they can then bring to those their own students.
I think every teacher that I've ever met, my own teachers that I had and the teachers of my kids, they always seem to be people with a calling. You know, they didn't come into this business for money, for sure. So the dedication has always been there, right?
Yes, the commitment has always been there, the dedication has always been there, the desire to see those students thrive has always been there.
I saw a UNESCO projection that said in the year 2015, in 96 countries around the world, there's going to be a need for almost 2 million more teachers.
Right.
So it's really important to get this right with the influx of teachers that are going to be coming into the system pretty quickly, huh?
I think that's right. And I think it's also important to get it right. If we want to have a more scientifically literate public, we're going to have to teach those people that science in middle school and in high school and at some undergraduate level, because not everyone is going to major in science.
You know, so far we've been talking about how to tweak and maybe do a little bit more than tweak to make the system work and, you know, for the students to learn, et cetera. But I just remembered, you know, you're an expert, I think, on creationism versus evolution. You talked about that a lot, if one can be an expert on it. That's a problem of just a whole different kind, really, where people are fundamentally in disagreement about what's to be taught. Could you talk about the creationism versus evolution?
It's a really interesting problem, because the opposition to the teaching of evolution is really founded in part on a fairly dramatic failure to understand what evolution really is. A fairly dramatic failure to appreciate the amount of data in support of it, the amount of evidence in favor of it. And it almost is a kind of opposition based on the idea that I don't think I'm going to like this, and so therefore I don't think it should be taught. Now, to be sure, there are aspects of the scientific facts in evolution that are at odds with what a lot of people hold in their faith tradition, the literal interpretation of the Bible being the most obvious.
Right.
And yet, not every Christian denomination takes the Bible literally. And yet, not every Christian denomination feels that the teaching of evolution and the study of evolution is problematic or threatening to their very concept of the existence of God. And so you really have an interesting situation in which one particular type of theology, if you will, is driving an opposition to a whole body of science, and it's often based on the perceived threat and a failure to appreciate how much evidence there really is.
You know, on its own terms, the creation versus evolution controversy seems to be kind of an odd little blip. But then you add to it the suspicion of vaccines that people take for diseases, the arguments about global warming, whether it's really happening. I saw on Saturday Night Live a couple of years ago on their weekend update, they did a report about the molten core at the center of the Earth, and then the comment was, today, President Bush said that he's against it. You know, and it really seems like a kind of attack on science itself, not just creationism, not just where the global warming is happening, but a fight over the big picture. Who's going to be able to describe the big picture?
I think that's right. I think that you're right, that it's not just a blip in and of itself. It's an example of this problem of not really accepting scientific results that we either don't like or can't understand intuitively. So, for example, you hardly ever see a massive public movement against cardiovascular surgery.
No, I've never seen one.
No one ever says cardiovascular surgery is a hoax. All they do is open you up and fiddle around in there and drop sponges in, close you up and go away. They don't really do anything. You get better on your own, or you don't. You just don't hear that.
Right.
Because I think all of us have some notion of what that's involved, and we think we understand it. Even though a cardiovascular surgeon will spend 10 years post-medical school training to do that, we think we understand it, and at some level we do. But it's very hard for someone without a good bit of training to think about global warming. It's very hard to think about evolution. We're talking about phenomena that unfold over long time periods and vast spatial scales. And if I tell you that some of the most compelling evidence for global warming is in the temperature rises in the Arctic and the Antarctic, the average person thinks, I wonder where that is.
Right.
I don't experience that.
So is it a fear of difficult material, a fear of being intimidated?
I don't know that it's a fear of, I don't know if it's, how much of it is a fear of difficult material, how much of it is an inability to wrap your mind around phenomena that occur on these vast spatial scales and over big time periods. You know, our brains are really good at recognizing immediate phenomena. That light is bright, that sound is loud.
Right.
I understand that if I run my hand along a frayed wooden fence, I'm going to get splinters. We're pretty good about the here and now. Where it takes training to think about the long-term consequences. So if I say, look, farmers putting fertilizer on their fields in Iowa is a major contributor to the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico off the mouth of the Mississippi, it's pretty easy to think to yourself, wait a minute. That's a long way from Iowa to the mouth of the Mississippi. Or if I say to you that changes in farming and herding practice in Mongolia change the soil capacity for change the ability of the soil to stay put, and a big windstorm picks up all this dust and drops it in the South Pacific where it fertilizes phytoplankton growth, you say, get out of here.
You know what's really troubling?
But
I think
that's what we found.
Yeah, I see it, and I think what's really troubling is there seems to be something a little bit broader, even that what you're describing is a part of, kind of loss of faith in information-based decision making. You know, you see it in the election cycles in this country where people really aren't trying to get the information about candidates. They just want to be swayed emotionally, and somebody made a good showing at a debate or whatever, and there's nothing any deeper than a kind of superficial appreciation. That's really troubling.
It is troubling, and I think you can take it back to that golden era of science in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
I think you could make an argument that when people in general struggle to understand something, they would trust the authorities. So that if your doctor told you you needed to give up smoking because it will give you health problems in 40 years, it's really hard to imagine 40 years from now, because you sit there and think, I feel fine. What's wrong with my cigarette? I feel fine. But you trust your doctor, right? You have some trust in the authority of the doctor. You have some trust in the authority of the scientist that says, you know, if you have lead-based paint in your home, this is going to be a problem. You have leaded gasoline, it's going to be a problem. There is in the anti-vaccination movement, there is in the global warming is a hoax movement, a fundamental failure to trust the scientists, to trust people who have expertise and authority as they were trusted before. So now, if from an era in which I don't really understand this, but I'll trust the expert, now we're in an era of I don't really understand this, so the expert must be full of baloney.
Dr. Travis,
change.
we just have a couple of minutes left. If you were king of the world and you could take some steps to remedy the problems that we're talking about, the goal being to have adequate and better than adequate science education, where do we start, and who can take action? What can we do?
If I were king of the world, I would mandate that we all start by teaching science as a process of thinking, not as a bunch of facts. So I would go, and I've done this, I'd go into a 4th grade class and I'd say, you guys like baseball? You use wooden bats or aluminum bats? And a young man or young woman will say, we use a metal bat. I said, yeah, it hits farther than a wooden bat, right? And they'll say, yeah. I said, yeah, and I can prove it. I'll hit a ball with the aluminum bat, you hit one with a wooden bat, and we'll see if it goes farther. The kids will immediately say, well, you're bigger than we are, of course it'll go farther. I said, oh, really? Well, what should we do? Well, we each hit it with an aluminum bat and a wooden bat, and we'll see which bat, given the person holding the bat, makes the ball go farther. Well, you could walk those kids into a perfect experiment, and then you say to them, that's what science is, thinking logically about how to solve problems.
So the first step is to take science out of its compartmentalized place in the culture and start connecting it more with people's lives.
Connecting, yeah, making people appreciate science as a way of thinking about their world, connect it with their lives, and get them excited about, now let's play that game with soil and water.
I am so sorry to say that we're out of time. I wish we had another couple of hours. Dr. Travis, thank you so much for being with us today.
It's my pleasure.
I'd like to thank our guests for making time for this discussion. Thank you, Dr. Travis. I'd also like to thank the University of Oklahoma College of Arts and Sciences for their support of Current Conversations. This program is produced by Outreach Video and Media Services. For Current Conversations, I'm R.C. Davis Undiano, and I hope you'll join us again. Thank you for watching.